In the third week of March 2026, a publishing announcement landed in the royal world with the quiet force of something that had been a long time coming. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, formerly the Duchess of York to be precise, following her former husband Prince Andrew's title deprivation in late 2025, had signed a book deal with a major New York publishing house. The advance, according to sources familiar with the terms, was substantial. Multiple reports placed it in the region of $12 million. The working title of the book had not been publicly disclosed, but its subject matter, confirmed by people close to the project, extended well beyond the story of her marriage to Andrew and the long, painful saga of his public disgrace. It extended, according to those same sources, to Harry and Meghan, specifically to things Sarah Ferguson witnessed, was told, or was party to during the years when the Sussexes were still inside the institution. Years when she and Meghan had, by multiple accounts, developed a connection rooted in a shared experience of being outsiders within the most inside institution in the world. Both women had been embraced by the royal family and then, in their respective ways, pushed to its margins. Both had spoken publicly, at various points, about the loneliness of that position. Both had found in each other, according to sources close to both households, a degree of understanding that was difficult to find elsewhere. And now Sarah Ferguson was writing it down. The reaction in Montecito, California, according to people familiar with the Sussex household in the days following the announcement, was not straightforward. Anger. It was something more complicated than that, something closer to the feeling you get when you realize that a conversation you thought was private was never quite as private as you believed. Today, we are going to tell you the full story of this book, of what it is reported to contain, and of why its existence has created a moment of genuine and significant anxiety for Harry and Meghan. We are going to tell you who Sarah Ferguson is, not the caricature version, but the real, complicated, resilient, financially precarious, deeply human version. We are going to explain what she and Meghan are reported to have shared over the years, and why the depth of that connection makes this book so much more significant than a standard royal memoir. We are going to tell you what, specifically, sources say the book addresses. And we are going to ask the question that this whole situation keeps circling. When the person who understands you best decides to tell your story, what can you possibly do about it? We are going to take you through all of it today, carefully, without exaggeration, and with the respect for your intelligence that this story deserves. If this is your first time on this channel, we want you to know that this is exactly what we do. We take the stories of the royal family, and the ones that require time and context to understand properly, and we tell them with the care and the depth they deserve. Please hit the subscribe button right now and turn on the bell notification. Every new video comes directly to you, and you will not miss a single development. We are glad you are here. Now let us begin properly. To understand why Sarah Ferguson's book matters, and why its specific contents, as reported, have created the reaction they have, you need to understand who Sarah Ferguson actually is. Not the tabloid version, the real one. Sarah Margaret Ferguson was born on October the 15th, 1959. She grew up in a world adjacent to royalty. Her father, Major Ronald Ferguson, was a polo manager to Prince Charles and later to Prince Philip, but not within it. She was not raised in palaces. She was raised in a family that knew the aristocratic world from the inside, but occupied its edges rather than its center. That background gave her something rare. She understood the institution, its language, its expectations, and its pressures without having been entirely formed by them. She married Prince Andrew, the second son of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, in July 1986. The wedding was a genuinely popular event. Sarah was warm, unguarded, funny, and seemingly unintimidated by the weight of what she was marrying into. The public adored her at first. She was a refreshing contrast to the more formal expectations of royal comportment. She was called Fergie, a nickname that carried both affection and eventually a kind of condescension. The press that initially celebrated her exuberance gradually turned on it. She was too loud, too undignified, too willing to be herself in ways the institution did not sanction. The marriage to Andrew ended in divorce in 1996, but the relationship, and this is a point that almost every account of both their lives returns to, never really ended. They continued to live in proximity. They co-parented their daughters Beatrice and Eugenie with what observers consistently described as genuine warmth and cooperation. They were, by the time of Andrew's public disgrace, closer in many ways than many married couples. And they had, together, survived things that most people never have to face. Sarah Ferguson survived the toe-sucking photographs. She survived the cash for access scandal of 2010, when she was filmed apparently offering access to Andrew in exchange for £500,000. She survived the years of debt, serious, grinding, humiliating debt, the kind that requires constant management and constant negotiation and constant awareness that your financial survival depends on your public profile. She survived the Epstein scandal, the questions about what she knew and when, the guilt by proximity that is one of the cruelest features of public life. She survived Andrew's Newsnight interview, one of the most catastrophic pieces of television in the history of the monarchy. She survived his title deprivation. She survived his arrest. She has survived a great deal, and she has done it largely without the institutional support that might have been expected from the family into which she married 40 years ago. She is not on the civil list, the official roster of royals who receive public funding for their duties. She funds herself. She has for years funded herself through writing, through commercial deals, through the kind of relentless self-invention that comes when the alternative is financial collapse. That is who is writing this book, not a vindictive outsider, not a stranger to the family, but a woman of 66 years who has spent 4 decades inside one of the most complicated families in the world, who knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking, and who has, by the accounts of those close to her, reached a point in her life where she feels that her story, told fully and honestly, is the one thing she has left that is entirely and unambiguously hers. Now let us turn to the specific dimension of this book that has attracted the attention of the Sussex household. According to sources familiar with the manuscript's contents, the book does not confine itself to Sarah Ferguson's own experiences. It addresses, in some detail, the period between approximately 2016 and 2020, the years of Meghan's entry into the royal family, her marriage to Harry, the escalating tensions within the institution, and the eventual decision to step back from royal duties in January 2020 that became known as Megxit. And it does so, according to those sources, from the perspective of someone who was not merely an observer of those events, but a participant in some of the private conversations that surrounded them. The connection between Sarah Ferguson and Meghan Markle is something that has been noted, if not fully explored, in previous royal coverage. When Meghan arrived in the royal world in 2016, she was, in certain specific ways, in a position that Sarah Ferguson understood from personal experience. She was an American. She was from outside the aristocratic tradition. She was warm and confident and direct in ways that the institution sometimes struggled to accommodate. She had a professional life and a public identity that preceded her royal role, and that the institution regarded with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Sarah Ferguson had navigated all of those same tensions 30 years earlier, and by the accounts of people who knew both women during this period, she offered Meghan something that was not always easy to find inside the family: the perspective of someone who had been there, who had felt the specific pressures of that specific position, and who had survived them. The two women spent time together. They had conversations, private conversations, the kind that happen between people who trust each other, who feel understood by each other, who are not performing for an audience. the kind of conversations that you do not expect to see printed in a book. And what Ferguson reportedly includes in her manuscript is, in part, the content of those conversations. Not as a betrayal, according to sources close to her, she reportedly frames it as context, as necessary background for understanding her own experience and the dynamics of the institution during that period. But context, when it involves things said in private, is not always experienced as context by the person whose words are being contextualized. The specific passages that have generated the most concern in the Sussex household, according to multiple reports in the second and third weeks of March 2026, relate to two areas. The first concerns Meghan's own account, as shared privately with Ferguson, of her experience inside the institution, accounts that, according to sources, in some respects differ from the public version as told in the Oprah interview and the Netflix documentary, not contradict necessarily, but nuance in ways that complicate the established narrative. The second area concerns the period immediately before and after the decision to step back from royal duties. Ferguson was, by her own public account and by the accounts of those around her, someone Meghan spoke with during that period. What was said during those conversations about the timing of the decision, about the motivations behind it, about what Harry and Meghan hoped to achieve by leaving, is, according to sources, among the material that Ferguson has chosen to include. Read that last sentence carefully, not what they said publicly about why they left, what they said privately, in a context of trust, to someone who was, at the time, a confidant. That is the personal reality, and the Sussexes knew it the moment they heard about this book. Let us take a brief pause here, because we have covered significant ground, and there is considerably more still to come. If you are finding this story as important as we believe it is, please take a moment right now to share this video with someone who follows the royal story, a friend, a family member, someone who would value having this explained properly and in full. Sharing takes just a moment, and it genuinely helps us bring this kind of careful, thorough coverage to more people who deserve it. We are grateful for every share. Now let us continue. There is a legal dimension to this story that deserves careful explanation because it bears directly on what Harry and Meghan can and cannot do in response to this book. In both the United Kingdom and the United States, the publication of private conversations in a memoir is governed by a combination of privacy law, defamation law, and, in some circumstances, contract law. In England, the law of privacy has developed significantly in recent years, and there are circumstances in which a court will grant an injunction, a legal order preventing publication, if it can be demonstrated that the information was genuinely private and that publication would cause disproportionate harm. However, the bar for such an injunction is high, and in the specific circumstances of this book, where the information reportedly comes from private conversations between two adults, neither of whom was under a formal non-disclosure agreement with the other, the legal options available to Harry and Meghan are more limited than the public discussion has sometimes suggested. A defamation action is possible if the book contains statements that are false and damaging, but a defamation action carries the same risk that we discussed in the context of the Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell situation. It triggers a disclosure process that neither side can fully control. Any legal action that Harry and Meghan take in response to this book will require them to produce documentation, correspondence, and records that they may prefer to keep private. The legal trap is not unique to their situation. It is a feature of defamation law that applies to everyone equally. The most straightforward legal option, and the one that sources suggest the Sussex legal team is currently exploring, is a privacy claim under English law, seeking either an injunction to prevent publication or damages after the fact. The challenge is that Sarah Ferguson is a British citizen publishing through an American house, which creates jurisdictional complexity. American courts are historically reluctant to enforce foreign privacy judgments against publications that contain truthful information, and the First Amendment protection for memoir and personal narrative in the United States is robust. In plain terms, the legal options are real, but they are not simple, and pursuing them carries risks as well as potential benefits. Sources close to the Sussex household, speaking in mid-March 2026, described the internal conversation as focused primarily on understanding exactly what is in the manuscript before deciding on a course of action. The publishing house involved has not released an advance copy. The specific passages attributed to the book have come through secondary sources, people who have been briefed on its contents, rather than people who have read it directly. It is possible that the reporting about what the book contains is itself incomplete or inaccurate. It is possible that what Ferguson has written is more nuanced or less damaging than the early accounts suggest. That uncertainty, the not knowing, is in some ways the most destabilizing element of the situation, because you cannot respond effectively to a book you have not read, you cannot mount a legal challenge to passages you cannot verify, and you cannot control a narrative that has not yet been set. The one thing you can do, and the thing that sources suggest the Sussex team is actively doing, is attempt to reach Sarah Ferguson directly, to have a conversation, to understand what she has written and why, and to explore whether there is a version of this that does not result in a full-scale public confrontation between two women who were, not long ago, something closer to friends. Those conversations, if they are happening privately, as they should, and whether they will produce any result that changes the trajectory of this book remains, as of this recording, genuinely unknown. Let us now step back from the specific details of this situation and look at the broader pattern. Because this story does not exist in isolation, it is the latest in a series of moments in which the private life of the Sussex household has found its way into public view through channels that Harry and Meghan did not control and did not anticipate. There was the publication of Harry's memoir Spare in January 2023, which revealed private conversations and family dynamics that other members of the royal family had not consented to share publicly. There were the Netflix documentaries, which drew on private footage and intimate moments in ways that some members of the family found deeply uncomfortable. There were the multiple books by royal biographers, Bower, Scobie, others, drawing on sources close to both camps. In each of those cases, someone decided that their account of events was important enough to share publicly, and that the privacy of the people involved was a secondary consideration to the importance of the story. Harry and Meghan made that calculation in their own favour repeatedly and deliberately. They argued, each time, that the public interest in their truth justified the private cost to others. What is happening now is that the same calculation is being made by someone else, by someone who also has a story, by someone who also has a truth that she believes the public has a right to hear, by someone who also has financial pressures that make the prospect of a major publishing deal not merely attractive but necessary, not with cruelty, but with a consistency that is hard to attribute to coincidence. The world that Harry and Meghan entered when they stepped into the arena of public narrative, the world of memoirs and documentaries and candid interviews, is not a world that can be selectively inhabited. It is not a world where you can set the terms of disclosure and expect everyone else to abide by them. It is a world where everyone has a story, and everyone in time tells it. Sarah Ferguson has been in that world longer than either Harry or Meghan. She has told her story before, in multiple forms, with varying degrees of candor. She knows how it works, she knows the cost of it, and she has calculated, apparently, that the cost of this particular telling is one she is prepared to pay. Now let us be honest about something, because this story deserves honest treatment. We do not know, with certainty, everything that this book contains. We do not know with certainty whether the passages attributed to it in reporting are accurate representations of what Ferguson has written. We do not know whether Harry and Meghan will choose to respond legally, publicly, or privately. We do not know whether the book will ultimately be published in its current form, in an amended form, or at all. What we know is this. As of the third week of March 2026, Sarah Ferguson has a publishing deal worth a reported $12 million. That deal encompasses a memoir that covers, according to multiple sources, the years of the Sussex family's most turbulent period within the institution. The contents of that memoir include material drawn from private conversations with Meghan, and the reaction of the Sussex household to the existence of this book is one of genuine and serious concern. Those are the confirmed facts. Everything else is, at this stage, reporting and analysis. And we have tried throughout this account to be clear about which is which. What happens next will depend on several things: the specific content of the book as it nears publication, the legal advice Harry and Meghan receive, and the options that advice opens up, the degree to which Sarah Ferguson is willing to negotiate the framing of specific passages, if not their existence, and perhaps most significantly, the question of what the Sussex household decides is the most important thing to protect: their public narrative, their legal standing, their commercial partnerships, their privacy, their relationship with the wider royal family. Not all of these can be simultaneously optimized. Some of them are, at this moment, in direct tension with each other, and the choice of which to prioritize will shape every decision that follows. There is also the question of Andrew. Because this book exists, first and foremost, as a book about Sarah Ferguson's experience of the most significant crisis of her adult life, the public exposure and eventual arrest of the man she spent 40 years loving, fighting with, divorcing, reconciling with, and ultimately standing beside in a way that defied every expectation the public had for how their story would end. That story, Andrew's story and Ferguson's place within it, is genuinely important. It raises questions about institutional accountability, about the management of scandal, about the way the monarchy handled decades of warning signs before the situation reached its current point. Those questions deserve to be answered, and Sarah Ferguson is, in many ways, the person best positioned to answer them if the Harry and Meghan material in the book is in the end supplementary to that central story, context, rather than the main event. Then the significance of it may be somewhat different from what the early reporting has suggested. A memoir that addresses the institution's broader failures during the 2016 to 2022 period, and in which the Sussex experience is one thread among several, is a very different thing from a memoir specifically targeting Harry and Meghan. We will know more when the book is closer to publication. We will know more when the legal situation clarifies. We will know more in time than we know now, and we will continue to cover it with the same care and the same commitment to accuracy as the story develops. Let us end where every story of this kind eventually must end, not with the legal filings or the publishing contracts or the financial implications, but with the human beings at the center of it. Sarah Ferguson is 66 years old. She has spent the better part of 4 decades being defined in the public imagination by her mistakes, by the photographs, by the debt, by the scandals that attach themselves to her name. She has been mocked and dismissed and underestimated more times than anyone should have to absorb. And she has kept going. She has written books and given interviews and appeared on television and done the relentless, exhausting work of remaining relevant and solvent in a world that would happily have forgotten her. She is not a villain in this story. She is a woman who is trying to tell her truth, and whose truth happens to intersect in uncomfortable ways with other people's truths. That does not make it simple. It does not make it painless for anyone involved, but it makes it human. And Meghan, whatever one thinks of the choices she has made, and people think very different things, as the years of commentary make abundantly clear. There is something specifically painful about the idea that a woman who spoke to you privately, in a context of trust, as someone who understood what you were going through, has now chosen to put those private words into a book. It is the particular pain of feeling that your vulnerability was treated as material, that your confidence was treated as content. That pain is real. It deserves to be acknowledged, not dismissed. Even in the context of a much larger and more complicated story. Because what this situation ultimately reflects is something that anyone who has ever trusted the wrong person or discovered that a private conversation was less private than they believed will recognize. The feeling that the words you said when you were not performing, when you were not managing your narrative, when you were simply speaking honestly to someone you thought was safe. Those words have a way of finding their way into the light. That is a human truth. As old as friendship, as painful as betrayal, and as complicated as the line between the two. She will navigate it. Because that is who she is. Because she has navigated everything else. But the navigation will not be easy. And the outcome for all the people involved is not yet written. Thank you so much for staying with us through every part of this story today. It is a layered and complex situation, and we are genuinely grateful for the thoughtfulness and the patience you bring to it. We want to ask you a very specific question in the comments. Here it is. Do you believe that Sarah Ferguson's decision to write about her private conversations with Meghan is a legitimate exercise of her right to tell her own story? Or does the nature of a private confidence place certain things beyond the reach of any memoir, regardless of whose story it intersects with? That question has no simple answer, and we would genuinely love to hear where you land on it. Every comment is read by us personally, and your perspective shapes every story we cover next. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment to do it now. Click subscribe, turn on the bell, and join a community that follows these stories with care, with balance, and with the deep respect for your intelligence that you deserve. We will see you in the next one. Thank you so much. We will see you very soon.